Hello, and welcome to For the Love of Truth. This is episode 241. And today I'm delighted that I've got a chance to have a conversation with Brian Halliday. Now, if you don't know Brian, I'm going to suggest you step back and have a watch and listen to episode 240 before you listen to this one, because it will give you really the framework and the groundwork for this, because this one is about moving forwards from episode 240. In this episode, we are talking about specific tools and strategies to help you deprogram yourself from the programming that you are being subjected to, and how to recognize when you are being programmed either externally by external sources or by yourself. These are very simple and powerful tools that Brian is going to go through. It's not a long episode at all, but it's packed with information. And I'd encourage you to spend some time somewhere where you can concentrate on this. And I hope you find these tools as useful as I do. And I'm planning on being able to use some of these strategies immediately. I'm planning on having Brian back in the future for further discussions. And in the meantime, you guys are absolutely amazing. And I will see you in the next episode. Take care. Bye bye. So, Brian, thanks so much, mate, for taking time out of your day to speak to me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I watched your video the other day, and you very kindly agreed that I could put that on the channel. And you and I had a chat, and I thought it'd be a good idea if you could explain where you started with that and what you feel comes next in terms of tools and by helping people, if you would please.
Well, the reason why I did this video, it was for another group originally, and what I noticed in the group, there was a lot of posts about, and there still is a lot of posts about people having real problems with the division within families and anxiety and worry
Yeah.
about people that are either going to take the vaccination, and probably now most people have actually got it. So there's a lot of anxiety and fear and arguments. And so what I thought would probably be the best place to start would be to make people aware of the actual process that everybody's been through, and so that you could come from a place of seeing the people around you who you're really worried about. You can understand what they're going through,
Yeah.
so you can be a little bit more detached from it and have a little bit more control over your own emotional stuff. That was the idea behind it.
Okay, that's great. And if people haven't seen that video, I'll put a link in the description of this one so you can have a watch. And it's worth watching because it explains specific steps as to how they've pulled off this great hypnosis, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes. So that was the thing I said at the beginning of the video. The thing that really, and I was funny enough, I was talking to somebody about it yesterday. The reason why I was walking about with such a big smile on my face. I mean, it's not exactly bargain basement hypnosis, but what I mean is it's a trick that most stage hypnotists do, and yet they were doing it in such a big scale, and everybody was falling for it, and I just couldn't believe it, really.
Mm. Good. All right. So what do you feel would be a useful way that people could help them not feel under such pressure and such division within family and friends and everything? Because I've seen people's relationships blown apart over this.
Well, I think I kind of hinted at that at the end of the video, and the first thing to realise is it doesn't matter what side of the fence that you're on, both sides are in trance. And as I explained in the video, which I would encourage people to go back to the video
Yeah.
because it's in more detail, is that we're always in one trance or another. It's just how the mind works. I mean, once you really understand about everyday hypnosis, you begin to understand that you actually generate your own experience inside through the data that you receive from the outside world. And so, in actual fact, that all this stuff that's running around inside you isn't caused by the outside world, and it isn't really even caused by members of your family or your friends. You're generating that experience inside you. And once you understand that and you know how to shift and change into a more appropriate trance, you can have a lot more control over your own inner experience. And in turn, that actually influences the people around you as well.
Okay. All right. So what specific steps do you think would be useful for people to be taking with that level of understanding?
Well, I think the key thing behind all this is the emotional thing, right? And as I explained in the video, the reason why the government got you into a high emotional state, fear, is because it makes you a lot more suggestible. And the basic process that people go through, there's two types of thoughts. There's thoughts that they're incoming thoughts and there's outgoing thoughts.
Yeah.
And the incoming thoughts surface up inside from the data that you're collecting from the outside world. So the incoming thoughts come in, start off as a thought, right? And if that thought is emotionalized and it's emotionalized enough, it becomes a belief. Once it becomes a belief, you start to see the world through the lens of that emotion. So if it's fear, you start to see the world as a sort of fearful place. if that emotion can be hyped up to a certain degree, it moves from a belief to a conviction. Once it moves to a conviction, it's almost kind of like that belief is now sandboxed, and it's really hard to pick that belief apart. And so when you're trying to wake people up and you're showing them all the evidence and you're putting it in front of them and they can't see it or they can't process it, it's because they've been taken through this process where they've had these emotionalized thoughts which have formed beliefs which have then been formed into convictions. And so when you become aware of that process, if you want to protect yourself, what you really need to understand is anything that comes seeps in from the outside, you have to stop it before it becomes emotional. You have to remind yourself that if you're becoming emotional, the door is opening and you're being led into a trance, which will then eventually take you into the sandbox, this conviction. So, and that's really difficult to shift. And it happens not just with what's going on, it happens in life in general. So what you have to realize is that if you're having this big emotional response right away in a reaction to what's happening with your family, you're going through that same process. So the first step is to stop that becoming an emotion. So that's your incoming thoughts, and be prepared from it. Be prepared to deal with what's going to happen, but stop it becoming emotional. Find a way. There's lots of techniques we could go over later on, but find a way to totally dissociate yourself from that and stop it becoming emotional. And the second part is your outgoing thoughts, and your outgoing thoughts are thoughts that you consciously decide to have, and you just go through the same process, but you do it with what you want and the changes that you want to make. So you start off again with the thoughts that you want to put out into the world and the changes that you want to make, and you build emotions around them, but you build positive, strong emotions, emotions of kind of strength, possibility, that kind of thing, and then you run that through your mind till that becomes a conviction and it becomes locked in. And once these conscious thoughts and beliefs that you form become convictions, then it's almost like you inoculate yourself against any of the effects that's happening.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that because that's some of the stuff I've used with NLP and stuff over the years too. You can make it that you are literally waterproof against the rain.
That's exactly what you want to do. And the other thing, of course, is if you do that, then the energy that you give out is going to be totally different. And the people that you're interacting with and dealing with, they're going to pick it up differently. So you have probably got a better chance of changing people. But at the same time, you don't want to you don't want to be you don't want to grasp onto that, because there is a strong possibility that people who are in this sandbox, if you like, you'll never wake them up, and you have to accept that that's a strong possibility that these people might never wake up no matter what happens.
Mm. Yeah,
And
well,
the other thing for me is that, for me personally, which has helped me personally, is I caught onto this quite early on, was that in order for me to survive in the future, you have to accept that you are going to lose a lot of long-term friends, and you might lose family members. But I think the real important thing that we all have to do right now is to build new networks with like-minded people.
yeah,
And that's the other thing that I have in my thoughts. That one of the programs I ran through my mind is I would actually see myself going out, having fun, having laughs and all that kind of stuff, and I would run these programs from my mind, and now it's happening for me. So you really need to decide what it is that you want. These are just classical NLP
yeah.
fundamentals, and you need to have sort of like really effective techniques for reprogramming your mind. In other
Yeah.
words, outward thoughts rather than inward thoughts.
Yeah, it's funny because I have conversations with people, and quite a lot of people say, "Well, I don't know what I want." I said, "Well, it's easy. Just look at what you don't want and just do the opposite. That'll start you off." Because certainly in my experience, most of my life has been shaped by experiences I don't want, and that's given me much more clarity on things I do want.
Well, there is a technique that I use, and I call it micro programs. And the whole idea is that um, sometime when you think about reprogramming your mind, you think about big things, but it's the tiny little things, little programs that make a difference. So, for example, if there's any area of your life right now that you're not happy with, what you basically do is, first of all, a program is made up of three elements. It's made up of self-talk, it's made up of a movie or an image, and it's made up of an emotion normally. So one of the techniques I came up with, if you get a piece of paper and you draw three little boxes on it, and you ask yourself this question over and over and over again. First of all, you think about the situation that you're not happy about, and the question you ask yourself is, how is my thinking creating this? Now, there's a presupposition in that question, and the presupposition is that you're actually creating this situation. But if you keep asking that over and over and over until you get the image first, so you become aware of what it is you're actually visualizing. You're basically seeing the situation the way you don't want it. And then you keep asking that question until you get the voice or the self-talk, and you write that down in the box. And then you write down the emotion that's associated with it. And it's exactly what you said. You just draw 3 boxes under it and you just write the opposite down. And then once you've wrote the opposite down, you've actually got a micro program which will start taking you in a different direction. And all you do is take time out through the day, 2 or 3 times a day, and you visualize and you speak to yourself in that way. You run it through your mind, and you imagine what it would be like to have that emotion. And if you do
Mhm.
that 2 or 3 times a day, I'll guarantee you, in less than 7 days, you'll actually start to notice a difference when you actually go out. You start interacting differently with people, and almost within days you'll start to notice slight changes.
Mhm.
And I think
But
micro
by the way, just
programs
if I
are.
might interject, one thing I've found that's very useful in that kind of process is not just to say the words in your mind, but to actually say them with your mouth because you're actually formulating the words and you're hearing them back. So it's like another loop I've found works really well.
Well, I've never done that, but yeah, why not try it? I think it,
Mm.
it, it probably could. But I think the reason why this works is you really pinpoint what it is. What
Yes.
it is that's actually creating the situation that you want, and they're tiny little things. They're not big things.
Yeah.
And if you start running the right things through your mind, the direct opposites, then I found personally that works.
I think that's very valuable. And for anyone that thinks it's the big things, I don't know how many of you have been bitten by an elephant, but I bet loads of you have been stung by a wasp. So it's the little things that get you. It's not the big things. Just focus on the little tiny stuff and put those right, and everything starts to fold the way it should.
Well, I used to work with professional golfers years ago, right? And the thing about the golfers was that if you look at the head of a club, it only has to be a fraction of a millimeter one way or the other way, and the ball ends up
Yeah.
miles out of the target. And I think the same sort of thing applies to this.
Yes.
That idea, it's because it's these little kind of micro programs that sets us off in a direction, if that makes
Yeah, and
sense.
I think that's also very useful, Brian, because a big problem can seem overwhelming, but if you can take a little tiny component of that and fix each small component, then you actually do start to make a lot of progress. And don't forget as well, not you, but everyone else, that one little change of one thing is actually a change to everything.
Hmm. And I think the next step, if we're going to talk about another step, I think
Please, yeah.
because I mean, I'm not going to go too much into my personal stuff here, but I had a really bad time with the first lockdown. Um, and I think the next big thing is the emotional release. Because the emotions really are a big part of the problem, and it's an indication that you're in trance. And you need to find really effective ways to release emotions, and I think that's the next thing as well. So when you and I think what happens with people in general, which they haven't been able to do with the lockdowns, is when you have a strong negative emotion inside, you try and get away from it. You try and bury yourself in activity. You do things. You basically try and escape from having to experience these feelings.
Mm.
And I think what you really need to do is take time out also and go into these feelings and experience them until they dissipate, basically. Because
Yeah.
if you don't take time out to actually go into your feelings and spend some time in there and just feel them, because that's what they're designed to do, then you basically suppress them and you're not even aware of them, and it builds up and it basically gets worse. And I think that was
Well, it's not
part
any
of the
worse. It
problem.
can cause physical manifestation called disease.
Well, that's right.
Sorry, anyway, I
And
interrupted your thought there. I didn't mean to.
no, it is, and it just manifests more of the stuff that you don't want. No,
Right.
it will. I mean, anger's associated with heart disease. Sadness, I think, if I remember right, is associated with things like cancer and things like. And the reason I think I did a program called Timeline Therapy years ago, some training in that, and the idea is that whenever you get a negative emotion, um, uh, you store it in your body until it's processed, until it's rationalized.
Mhm.
When it's actually stored in your body, it interferes between the communications between the cells, and the cells are always dying and replacing themselves. So the
Mhm.
idea is, if you could imagine a house, um, say a brick house, and if you took away one brick and you replaced it over a year, you would go back and see a completely new house.
Yes.
And it's the same with your body. And the idea is, if you've got these emotions in your body, it messes up that process, and that's how you get cancer and heart disease and all different types of things.
Yeah. If you look at the work of Dr. Jerry Tennant, he talks about how emotions are stored as magnetic areas around the body. They interfere with the movement of the electricity around the body, and low voltage equals disease.
Right. Well, it's the
Yeah.
same. Yeah, it's the
The
same thing.
same thing. Yeah. Exactly the same thing. That's really interesting. Really interesting. So, what are there other processes then that you could talk about around that?
You mean like different technique? Well, there was one technique that I developed. I could share it here if you want. And
Please, yeah.
well, I mean, I'll share a little bit of my personal situation, but basically, before I went into all this lockdowns, I had been looking after my mother with dementia for quite a number of years, and so I got to the point where my mum needed to go into care. She went into care about a week before the lockdown started, but I was also in a really bad place. I was just totally run down and emotionally smashed
Mm,
after 3 or 4 years watching my mother deteriorate. So I went into this whole thing in a really bad place, and what I discovered was that. Being isolated, totally on my own, I live on my own, and most of my friends were adhering to all this social distancing and believing it, so I never seen anybody.
mm,
That you were sort of faced with this internal situation. And what I realised was that most of the therapy techniques that you get out there, they're actually designed to deal with something that's in the past and something that's that's keeping you stuck. Whereas what I was going through, I was trying to manage something that was happening now,
yes.
because my mother was absolutely terrified to go into a care home, and I promised her I would never leave her there. I'd make sure I'd always be there for her. And of course, what actually happened was didn't see her for 6 months. So, and so I had this. I can't explain how it's the most intense negative thing I've ever been, a painful thing that I've ever been through.
Mm,
And I tried every technique that I know of to release this emotion. But what worked for me eventually, I started to experiment, and what worked for me was I literally spent months lying on my couch looking up at the ceiling, just going on inside and finding a way to release this emotion. And what worked for me was what I discovered. I mean, I don't know. I've never seen it anywhere else. It may be somewhere else, but I haven't seen it. But what I discovered was if you spatially if you think of what's happening inside you as a storm, if you uh, get above the storm and look upwards, and then just gently lower yourself as if you're sort of floating down backwards, looking up the way until you hit the storm. It's really quite strange because you can actually feel yourself hitting the edge of it,
mm,
and then imagine a bit like almost as if the storm's made a kind of like a really tough rubbery jelly, but you're like a hot stone, and
mm,
you just slowly melt into the middle of it, and you just melt into the middle of this storm. It reminds me a wee bit of the movie Twister. You remember in the scene in Twister where they chain themselves into the storm,
mm,
and the storm comes in and they get into the eye of the storm. That's the metaphor that explains it. And what you do is you get right into the middle of it and you stay there for a while, and then after 10, 15, 20 minutes, you just allow yourself to sink further down until you plop out at the bottom.
mm,
What I discovered was once you come out the bottom of that storm, what happens is this stuff gets released, and it just lets. Again, the only thing I can think of, it's a bit like a diver. You know, when you see these diving movies and you see all
mm,
the bubbles coming out of the air tanks,
mm,
it's that kind of feeling, and you actually feel it coming to your body. And I had a lot of stress that was kind of packed in because of what had happened over the
mm.
last few years. And so I would maybe do this for up to an hour. And the next again day when I woke up, I was completely flat, completely flat, totally gone. But because
Wow.
this was an ongoing thing, it would come back every couple of days, and I would just spend my time releasing that all the time. And I think having discovered that, it probably stopped me uh, getting into a much worse place than I was in.
Mm,
So that's a really simple technique. And then funny thing is, for me during the lockdown, I've always been a bit spiritual, but I think because I had nothing else to do, I really focused on the spiritual element. And
yeah.
what I noticed was when I started to listen to all the different people like Eckhart Tolle's, Stanley Banks, and a few other people, if you actually listen to their language, they talk spatially about where the spiritual part is. You'll hear about things like they say, well, the answers lie deep within.
Hmm.
And so there is what I discovered with that technique. There is a location, if you like, when you get to a specific
Yeah.
location, perceptually, obviously it's not real.
Yeah.
Whenever you get to this perceptual place, then this stuff does seem to release, and you reach peace.
Yeah.
And then they use other words like they use other locations like, for example,
Yeah.
beyond or before thought, before emotion, before consciousness. And so there always seems to be a spatial a location for
Yeah.
being able to be in touch with the spiritual element.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has. I think it has to manifest itself somewhere in this physical reality, in inverted commas, that we're experiencing, so that you can actually focus in on it because you're living your life through what is apparently a physical sensing apparatus. So by doing that, I think that allows you to focus in. Otherwise, it's too kind of ethereal. It's hard to get a hold of, and all the rest of it.
So I mean, like that's sort of known in NLP. That's your submodalities.
Yeah.
But what I realised after that was there does seem to be a sort of spatial location for this being in touch with the spiritual element as well. And when I was doing these techniques, that helped me. So I don't know if that helped anybody else, but
I
that's
think
something
so.
that helped me.
I found that really interesting as well. The way you described that is something I'll use later on. In fact, probably when we finish talking,
Right. Okay.
because we've all got stuff we can do with letting go of. And I
Hmm.
think that's also part of our journey here throughout. This life experience is about letting go and coming to terms with. And there's plenty of stuff. Certainly, I know that I have not been able to figure out how to deal with, so it's boxed away. But I can go and open that box up now and have a run through it.
Hmm. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think really the key is, and I even know some friends that I talk to who they, they go out to all these meetings all the time to meet people, and the reason why they do that is because when they go home they have this kind of feeling of fear, and really what people need to do is they need to take time out to go into this fear and to go into these feelings and drop out the other side, if you like.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, if you try and escape these emotions, all you do is you suppress them and you build them up like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, and I think also they've got a little bit of a habit of popping out somewhere inappropriate because some triggers happened and out they come. And if you're interacting with someone else, it's nothing they've done, but it triggers it. I've noticed that in myself sometimes. I think, where did that come from? But
Yeah,
you've just
definitely.
explained something. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, if you've ever known somebody who bursts into tears at the slightest thing or goes into fits of rage or anger, it's because they're accessing all these emotions, these gestalts of emotion that have actually built up. So the whole point is you want to try and, especially now, I think right now, I think you want to release all this fear of what's going on because you will manifest what you hold in anyway.
That's
You'll
right.
attract
Yeah.
more of what it is that you hold, even
Yeah.
if you're not consciously aware of this fear. You don't realize it, but you are transmitting it. You're transmitting it to everybody around you.
That's right. Yeah. That which you resist persists. But also, this level of programming runs deep. Even if you think you're immune to it, I don't think you are on all levels because it'll be getting at you.
Mhm. Well, I mean, even me, it's an ongoing process. I mean, right now I feel absolutely brilliant, but next month or next week it might be different again, and I'll have to go
Yeah.
through this process again. It's a never-ending process.
Yeah. No, that's really very powerful. That's really powerful. So is there anything else you think would be useful for people to be doing right now to help them along their journey?
Um, well, like I said, at the end of that video, I started to allude to the basic things. But
Yeah.
basically, first of all, is that you have to accept the way things are right now.
Yeah.
Your friends and your family around you. That's the first thing. The second thing is you really need to. What I would suggest is if you spend a lot of time on it in any of these anti-lockdown forums where people are constantly posting up facts and figures about what's happening and pictures of politicians and all that kind of stuff. You have to be. I think you have to really limit yourself to the amount of time you spend doing that because all you're doing is programming your mind and putting yourself to the other side of the spectrum. I mean,
Mhm.
both sides. It's the idea of duality again that in the world of form of duality. So, for example, you have night, you have daytime. If you didn't have nighttime, you wouldn't have daytime because we need things to compare it to.
Mm.
So, a lot of people watching this will probably refer themselves to being awake, and the other side to being asleep. So, these are the two sides of the spectrum, if you like. But both sides at the extreme live in fear, and so both sides of the stream living in an extreme emotion, which is a trance. So both sides are asleep, really. So if you're spending a lot of time reading up about every move that a politician's making, or every new piece of data that's coming in about the vaccinations and the death rates and all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
all you're doing is you're feeding your mind with that stuff, and you're basically pushing yourself to this extreme side.
Mhm.
So what I would suggest is that if you are doing that, really limit your time doing that and spend more time building a new trance, if you like, and that's
Yeah.
just basically sitting down and deciding what it is that you want and how you would like things to go in an ideal world. So,
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I stopped doing all the stuff, pointing all the facts and figures out and all the rest of it, because I thought this is serving nothing but to create more of a problem. So now what we need to
Uh,
do is look for solutions on health, and then you turned up, which is awesome, because it's also about creating more solutions. Because in the end, each and every one of us is responsible to ourselves in order to figure out how to best deal with this. And if we do that, you'll automatically impact those around you that want to be influenced in the same way.
and not only that, you'll also attract more people like you as
Yes.
well. And I think
Yes.
that's really, I honestly think the key to this in the long term to really get through this um, is to attract people who think like you and have a new network. There's also another element which I never thought of up until now, and it might be right now that you see things that are so bad that you can't actually believe they'll get better. The
Mm,
thing is, you don't at this stage you don't even need to form a belief, because one of the things that happens over and over again from people that have been through really bad times but turned them around into great opportunities was that they just had an inner sense or a faith that things would get better. They didn't know how they were going to work it out. They didn't even need to have a belief at that point, but they just had this faith that things were going to get better. And so, what I would really suggest is that you learn to detach from all this stuff that's going through all these groups and coming through the media. And to detach, you just don't spend time focusing on it. And what you basically do is you start to focus on what you want, and then you start to have some kind of faith, not necessarily in a religious sense, but some kind of faith that in some way, somehow, things will work out. And when you actually do that, it does send a signal to the back of your mind, your unconscious mind. And if you listen, you'll start to get keys, you'll start to get uh, hints about what your next move is,
that's
and you
right.
make these little moves. You'll get little ideas,
Yeah.
and all you have to do is then focus on these little ideas. It's a bit like,
But you only get that when you've gone quiet and you've got the stress out of the way.
and also when you develop this, do you know what it's a bit like? It's a bit like you want, you know what it is that you want. So you've got a destination, right? But you jump in the car at night time and it's foggy. Now you've got a map here that says if you do X, Y, and Z, you should get eventually to where you go. But in between, you're not exactly sure where it is. So there's some kind of trust and faith that as long as you take the first couple of steps and you keep going, you're going to get to where you
Yeah.
want. And I think that's the kind of mental the mindset. I think that if you can learn to adopt that and focus on that, I think that would be really helpful. And that you don't need to know all the answers at this point.
Yeah.
You just really need to know where you want to go, and you need to detach from all the crap that's going along on both
Yeah.
sides of the spectrum.
I think that's really good advice. It's an analogy maybe. I don't know if it's a particularly good one. You want to drive a 500-mile journey and you're sat there saying, well, I'm not going to leave until I can guarantee that every junction I get to and every traffic light, I'll be able to go straight through. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
So just get out and start doing stuff. I do that. And the other thing is you can't steer a parked car. There's been loads of times I'll start in a direction and then I have to do a complete U-turn, but it's easy to do because I've got some momentum. You can't steer a parked car.
Uh-huh, that's right.
Yeah.
And the
So
thing is, it comes to it, when you're driving a car, it is an unconscious process
yeah,
as well. You just get a feeling, I need to go this way, I need to go that way,
that's
but
right.
you're not going to get that feeling unless you have to get going.
But maybe that's why they've got us all so used to using sat nav, so we stop thinking and feeling for ourselves. Because I look at the sat nav and I argue with it and saying, I'm not going that way, that's ridiculous. So I still trust my instincts on that. Whereas I think a lot of people they get more and more reliant on all these external tools instead of trusting their inner voice and finding that inner voice, because that's what will guide you every time without fail.
I don't know if they did it intentionally, but that might be one of the benefits they're getting from all this automized stuff. I think it's
Yeah, I think I'm
definitely
probably
something.
a little bit entranced with the idea that perhaps everything is a complete, you know, machination of the machine. So I distrust all of it at this point. I'll just go my own way.
Well, the way I see it, though, I don't give them that much credit. I don't think they're as smart as they think they are. I
Yeah,
think they're
true.
kind of laughing right now because I don't think they can believe how well this has worked themselves. That's the image I have. I don't know if it's real or not.
Well, actually, that makes a lot of sense because it took a little while to gather some steam, didn't it? I think that the
Uh-huh,
the opportunity presented itself, and it was like, oh shit! And now all of a sudden they've ramped it up, but I think they're pushing it too far and too hard.
uh-huh.
But we'll see.
Well, we will see. So,
Good.
so that would be just the basic things I could suggest at the moment.
No, that's really helpful. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the very easiest way for them to do that? Should they be, looking for an email address which I can place, or have you got some kind of website, or you'll sort one of those
I'm
out? How are
going
you
to.
going to go
What
about
I
that?
will do is I'll put up a page tonight, and I've also run a couple of sessions for a group in the past for deprogramming.
Hmm.
And I used to run a program called Advanced Mind, and with that program, I worked with lots of different kinds of organisations and individuals. I've worked with
Hmm.
long-term unemployed, right up to CEOs of top government organisations.
Hmm.
I've worked with Mercedes-Benz, people like that. And so what I've been doing more recently, I've been using the sort of protocols that I designed for that years ago, which I haven't used for years, for deprogramming. So I've got a couple of sessions that I did for another group, and I've turned them into audios. So what I'll do is I'll put up a page tonight with an email address, sorry, an email box to collect their emails, and then I'll send them a link if anybody wants these free deprogramming audios, and
That's
also
awesome. Thank you.
I'll be able to keep in touch with people that way if they're interested
Okay.
about.
And are you available to do one-on-one sessions with people or group sessions? Is that something you're looking at doing?
Yeah, I mean, I am available. I remember there's different ways of working. I have a breakthrough process where normally people come and they'll come and work with me for a full day. And if you're stuck anywhere, whether it's a business problem or a personal problem, then the whole idea behind a breakthrough session is you come and you get that resolved in a day instead of months and sometimes years
Wow.
in therapy. And the other thing that I don't actually work with everybody though; they have to be suitable for this process, but most people are. But the other thing about a breakthrough process is you come with a list of all the things that have been holding you back. So, because the idea is about 2 hours into the process, we find the framework that's holding your problem together, but this is also the framework that's holding a lot of stuff together. And the idea is when we get 2 hours into it, it's like we pull a linchpin away. And the idea is we want to collapse all that. And so they can be a huge breakthrough. And the value of these things don't normally, they're not normally known for like 6 months, sometimes a year down the line, when you look back and you realise you've been doing all these things that
Yeah.
normally you would just come against a sort of like a brick wall. So that's one of the things. And then the other things I might be doing is I am planning to run some group programs as well on the deprogramming. But when I say deprogramming, it's not just about deprogramming; it's also about designing your life as well. And
Yeah. So to be deprogramming and reprogramming.
deprogramming comes first.
Yeah.
These are things I ran for years in the past, but right now the deprogramming seems to be the most important part for people at the moment.
Yeah.
So really, it's a process really that will enable you to sort of internalize what we've been speaking about and actually make it happen faster. There's a thing that I came up with years ago called unconscious amplification, and the idea behind that is that everything we do unconscious. In fact, we don't actually have much of a conscious mind.
Yeah.
In fact, neuroscience says it's only something like 6% of all our mental processes are conscious. I would even question that
Mm.
because just about everything we do is unconscious. So the whole idea is that what we do is if we amplify your unconscious processes, then the whole idea is that you break through the limitations that your unconscious mind has set.
Mm.
And so if you're in sales or whether it's relationships or whatever it is, by amplifying your unconscious processes, it just makes it easier to go out and get the kind of results that you want. So that's one or two sort of ideas I have right now to introduce some of my work into, and because for years I hadn't done it, but I've been pulled back into it because I've
Mhm.
had a few people asking for it. So yeah, these are plans that I've got at the
Okay.
moment.
I happen to think that the work that you have done and will start doing again is hugely important right now, and it'll be very beneficial as well. Really
Yeah,
good. Well, I think we can wrap that up there. That's great. But if you'll stay on the line, because I'll end the recording, then we can chat through a couple of other things. That's been great. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
that's been a
That was
pleasure.
a lot in a very short space of time. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, right, thanks.
Thanks.